There are a lot of iconic sport watches that came out of the 1970s. You've probably seen many of them scrolling through your Instagram feed, read about them on the news when they break records at auction. Maybe you've seen one in real life. They're pretty hard to come by, and that's because prices have made them largely inaccessible to most people, most collectors, most enthusiasts, certainly. So these are rare birds to see out in the wild. But there are a few watches from this era, sport watches even, that have kind of slipped under the radar that have every bit the pedigree of some of these other watches that are still available to this day. And one of them has slipped totally under the radar, and that brand is Girard Perregaux. My name is Blake Bettner, I'm the managing editor of Worn & Wound, and today we're talking about the Laureato. The Laureato was introduced in 1975, just after the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, and just before watches like the Patek Philippe Nautilus and IWC Ingenieur. This is not a Giorgenta design. This watch was designed by the Milanese architect Adolfo Natalini. However, it does take some similar era-specific cues, such as a very thin case and an integrated bracelet. Girard Perregaux had distribution channels in Italy at the time, and the watch takes its name from a 1967 movie, The Graduate, known in Italy as Il Laureato. The Laureato has had something of a trepidatious history since 1975, but today the watch enjoys a very strong identity that's kind of based in its roots, but this still feels like something of a modern watch in hand, and maybe that's because a lot of designs from this era have come back as new watches, so I have a hard time discerning what's era-specific to now and then. The Laureato collection in total includes exotic materials like ceramic and complications like a chronograph, but this is a simple time and date Laureato, just like the original, and it is sized at 38 millimeters, which is quite lovely on the wrist. This particular Laureato is a steel case that measures 38 millimeters in diameter and a hair under 10 millimeters in thickness. That adds up to a pretty exceptional experience on the wrist, as you might have guessed, and a lot of that is helped by the integrated bracelet, which absolutely melts on the wrist. These are slightly wider links than something that you'd find on, for instance, the new Ingenieur. However, they articulate in a way that still gives them that kind of silky feeling on the wrist. Now, it's worth noting that the first link of the bracelet here is a male end link that fits into a recession on the case. So the case itself doesn't flare out any further than it's about 44 millimeter lug-to-lug distance, although there isn't really any lug here to speak of, which is the case with a lot of these watches. The bracelet itself has a beautiful taper to it, which also lends to the overall wearability of the watch. And it tapers down into this deployant clasp that does not have a micro-adjust system built into it. Okay, let's get back to the dial here. This is referred to as copper by Girard Perregaux, and for good reason. Looks quite coppery, and it incorporates a Clos de Paris pattern on the dial that looks to have a lot of depth to it. So it catches light in a lot of really interesting ways at a lot of different angles. And then they are applied hour markers as well as an applied GP logo up at 12 o'clock. And the seconds hand itself also matches the color of the dial, which is kind of a nice detail, along with the date disc that has been color matched to the dial. And one note on that date disc, one of my favorite small details about this watch is actually the font used on that date disc to display the numbers. This is another comment that I had on the new IWC Ingenieur. It looks like they put some thought into that rather than just getting kind of a standard date disc that's been color matched to the dial. It adds just a bit more personality to the watch and kind of ties the whole thing together like a nice rug. One of the distinctive details about this watch that frames the dial on the case is this octagonal shaped bezel. It seems to be an area where a lot of these kind of sport watches of this era set themselves apart, with the likes of the porthole bezel, as well as modern watches that are trying to recreate this look, such as the Christopher Ward the 12 with its 12-sided bezel. This is a very distinctive feature that makes the Laureato somewhat recognizable at a distance. I think it works well here, and it doesn't really distract too much from the focal point of the dial itself. Such features have a tendency to become a little overly complex. Girard Perregaux finds a nice balance here, as it doesn't really distract from the focal point of the dial. Now, this watch, as I mentioned, is about 10 millimeters in thickness, wears exceptionally well, and that is in large part thanks to the extra slim movement inside. This is the GP 3300 movement here. It is an automatic movement. It has 42 hours of power reserve. The movement itself is only 3.3 millimeters in thickness, which allows the case to fit into such a tidy little footprint from pretty much every dimension. The watch has been within a few seconds a day during my time with it, but this is not listed as a chronometer or anything like that. The Girard Perregaux Laureato in 38 millimeters with this copper dial is priced at $14,900. Not a cheap watch by any stretch. That is about the same price as the new titanium Ingenieur. The steel Ingenieurs are a little bit less. But when you put it in the context of watches like the Royal Oak and the Nautilus and other watches of its ilk in the 70s, this is a movement that has just as much pedigree, a brand that has just as much history, then it's a little easier to see the value. Of course, it's not still inexpensive, but unlike those other watches, this is one that you could walk into a retailer and presumably get without too much trouble. There are even some interesting examples that you might find on the secondary market as well. Overall, I think the Girard Perregaux Laureato deserves a spot in the conversation with watches from Audemars Piguet and Patek Philippe and IWC, those kind of famous Genta designed watches. It has a lot of the qualities that those watches are celebrated for, and it does them really well here. And best of all, it's an exceptional watch to wear day to day. Now, this size case right now in steel is only offered with this copper dial. However, they do have other dial options at their 42mm size. Hopefully we'll see those options, such as the green dial, even the black dial, make their way into this 38mm case size, which I think makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. So hopefully we'll see more options in this size coming soon from Girard Perregaux. Overall, this is a really beautiful watch though. There's a lot to love about it, and I think it holds up at this price point pretty well. I'll have a lot more of my thoughts on this now live over on Worn and Wound. We'll link to that down below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this watch. Where does this fall within the list of all-time greats of 70s sport watches? Is it on the list? Is it at the table? Is it better? Let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We appreciate you tuning in. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to leave a like and share. It helps us out a lot. And until next time, take care.